I'm putting up a thing of a funny duck because it's going to be a spicy message and this might help make it a little bit more funny. I hold in my right hand something that you can't really talk about in front of big, large crowds. It's difficult sometimes to even, believe it or not, talk about it when you're talking in front of a church or a bunch of Christians. You know, it's kind of phenomenal to think that something that is so pervasive in our life is something that you really can't talk about. And not this thing, you can talk about that. I'm talking about this. Money, and this is crypto, this is trash. Don't ever invest in this. Money is one of those things that people have a really hard time talking about, especially in a Christian context. It's one of those things that we all view as being the lifeblood of our day-to-day lives, and I think because of that, it is the most tangible aspect of the world that we are forced to interact with. It's something that really challenges us when we start talking about who we are as Christians and as followers of Christ. Now, I'm not here to just sit here and give you the stereotypical talk about tithing and all that kind of stuff, though. If you have any cynical thoughts, maybe they'll cool those jets a little bit, because we'll get to those in a second. But instead, I want to talk about a story that you may have heard in the past, and it's the story of the widow's mite. You know, the story of this individual that was this poor woman who, in the midst of everybody else giving their offerings to the temple, she showed up and gave 2 humble coins and gave those. And Jesus looked at this woman and said, I tell you the truth, that while everybody else gave of the surplus, this woman gave more than anybody else because she gave out of her necessity. And the way that so many of us will interpret this story is to sit here and say, well, clearly this is trying to talk about the virtues of individuals who are humble in what they have, and trying to talk about a meek lifestyle and how that is better than the rich. But that's a very bad read of the story, because notice that Jesus wasn't looking at all of the other crowds and sitting here saying that they're all wealthy and the woman was poor and that was the difference. That's not what Jesus pointed out. He pointed out that others gave out of their surplus and the woman gave out of her necessity. Now, that is a very different view than what a lot of people have when it comes to their material wealth and their relationship with God. You know, so many people love to misinterpret what we find in the letters to Corinthians, in the church in Corinth, where it talks about that all individuals should give according to their own conscience. And they'll misinterpret that to sit here and say, oh, cool, well, if I don't feel like giving, I don't need to give. If I don't feel like giving to an individual I see on the side of the road, I shouldn't worry about that. I mean, after all, they're probably just going to spend it on drugs or booze. You know, if I don't want to give to a charity, I shouldn't feel like I'm obligated to do that. If there's some fundraiser for an individual in need, I mean, look, that's just, you know, if I can give to it. It's not about, you know, any kind of heart issue or anything like that. But that's not what we see when we see individuals who follow Christ. We see individuals who have wealth all throughout the Bible that clearly are pursuing God's heart. You see Solomon that was stupidly wealthy. You see David that was very wealthy. Even when we start getting into the New Testament, Paul was an individual who was willing to do without, and for periods of time lived without, but at the same time, he didn't have to live without. I mean, he had so much privilege that he grew up with in terms of his family heritage, his citizenship he had with Rome. He had so many things that he could leverage for a well-being. But yet, he was willing to give of himself. He was willing to go without out of his necessity so that he could pursue the things that Christ had called him to go do. And that is actually the heart that so many Christians end up having a hard time reconciling with. They have a difficult time looking at this wealth that they say, I earned this through my own skills and my own talent and my own sweat. I earned this. And in doing that, what we forget is that I couldn't have done any of this without God. God is the only one who gave me the skills, the talents, put me in this society, in this day and age, in this country to be able to earn any of this. And if that is the case, then who am I when my conscience and when my sense of conviction and when the calling that Christ has put in my life calls me to give these up? Who am I to stand in the way of what God ultimately blessed me with? Now, something that you touched on there a little bit at the end of your small group time, and that I think begs bringing up, are maybe some of the objections that people have whenever churches start talking about the almighty dollar. Again, we'll sit here and talk about the Bible, salvation, things like sin, things like temptations, things like, courage and giving confidence and comfort in times that we need that. We have no problem talking about this. Most of us don't have any problem talking about this, but as soon as we start talking about these little guys, all of a sudden things become a problem, and we become very good as cynical, smart individuals at coming up with reasons why the church shouldn't talk about this. What business is it of the church what I do with my money? Why does the church care about who I give to? You know what? It's just because the church probably wants to build up their checking account. It's probably because, you see so many churches out there that just put money into their facilities and their branding and, people who are, just making thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars being pastors, to these big mega churches and everything. So you know what? What's the church gonna do? After all, I have a family to feed. We become very good at coming up with all of these very common sense reasons why the church should just butt out of our wallets. And what we forget is that there is a spiritual connection to this. And it's not just a weak connection. It's a very direct connection. One of the things that we end up reading in the Bible is where it talks about the seeds that get scattered on the ground, and Jesus tells this parable about how some of these seeds end up falling on the road and they get burnt up, and some of the seeds end up falling on amongst the thorns and they get choked off, and they may initially sprout, but they can't really grow. And then you have others that fall on rich soil, and then they grow and they build strong roots. And we will sit here and talk about these things as if those are really just lessons about believers and kind of the environments that they find themselves in. But then what we forget is that there's very specific things. Jesus actually gives us an explanation of this parable. And what he explains is that, specifically talking about the seeds that fall amongst the thorns, he calls out wealth and describes how wealth is very similar to thorns that can choke off this sense of growth. And that right there is one of the reasons why churches do a great disservice to individuals in their congregations, and why we as Christians do ourselves a disservice when we avoid these conversations about money, because that is one of the key things that in our society today can keep us from truly growing. Think about that. When I started out talking about these, I talked about how a lot of people get offended that anybody wants to even mention this, because they will question the motives of the church or the pastor or the institution of Christianity or different charities. They'll question so many of these things. But when you really are being honest about what we are afraid of when it comes to talking about this, we're scared to death that something may cause us to want to give this up. That this thing that we worked so hard in, that we feel so invested in, is something that God may call me to do without. Maybe God is blessing me tremendously so that I can bless other people. And if that's the case, that's awesome. Maybe God is putting me in a position where I, like the poor widow, am an individual who is struggling and I can't make things work. And if that's the case, then I have the opportunity to experience that blessing that the widow experienced, being blessed by God, getting the approval of her Creator, her Savior, because she didn't give out of her surplus, but she gave out of her necessity. You're going to read about that in your small group, but I'll give you Pastor Joseph's general rules when it comes to, kind of keeping yourself accountable when it comes to giving. And I would say this: when you have an opportunity to give to somebody or to something that is, in need, somebody who is poor, somebody who is homeless, somebody who has just suffered a great loss, give and give generously. Treat that as an opportunity to show how this is not as important as the care that you have for that individual, even if it's a stranger. When it comes to giving to things like a tithe, whether you give that to the church, whether you give it to a mission, whether you give it to anything else, regardless of how you give it, treat your tithe the way a tithe is modeled in the Bible. Not necessarily numerically, but in terms of the Spirit, where it is given because it is a sign of devotion. It is an opportunity to practice the fact that my material goods are not as important to me as what God is calling me to do. And if you want to know how much is that, maybe it's 10%, maybe it's not, because 10% for a lot of people is very, very difficult. So I'd say this: figure out what is an amount that would be comfortable. We'll call it your surplus. And then give just a little bit more so that you have some knowledge that you're giving out of your necessity. And don't do it because you're trying to, bolster what this group is doing or that group is doing. Don't overly concern yourself with, all of the cynical ideas that we have according to our wisdom about, this institution or that institution might do this or that. Instead, pray and ask God, where is it that He is calling you to share some of the blessings that He has given you in your own life? And if you find this a very difficult task, if you find yourself just full of all the reasons in the world why no, it is better for God's blessings to stay with me, then ask yourself this: who do you think you are? And who do you think you are in the eyes of God that is so much better than the individual right beside you who may be in need? Now, I told you this lesson wasn't going to be about tithing, and it's really not. It's not about giving to a specific charity, making certain that you're giving an amount to your church or to several churches or to some denomination or giving it to Young Life or anything like that. Even though, yes, there are tons of good things that you could give your money to. It's about the heart that we have and what it is we worship. I've always said that at some point in time, all of us are going to have to ask ourselves, do we truly believe the stuff that is in this book? Is this just a list of different general morals that we should follow, a bunch of good stories that teach us things that can help kind of guide us as we try to make sense of things around us? Or is this truth? Is the God that we serve alive? And are we truly following Christ? And if we're following Christ, then we have to find our comfort in things not of this world. Too many of us think that if I just have enough of this, that if I am just able to secure enough things materially, if I am just able to have enough stuff squirreled away, or I'm able to buy certain things or have certain hobbies, that maybe then I will be fulfilled. Maybe then I'll be happy. And then if I have anything left over out of my surplus, maybe then God can have His. And when we do that, we ignore the fact that everything that we have, if we truly have a relationship with Jesus Christ, we understand that those things are only there because God put us in a position to experience these blessings. And if these are things that are not truly our own, then we should be willing, we should be even excited to have opportunities to be able to share love and comfort and blessings with other individuals. It's not just about giving $1 every now and then to some person you see on the side of the road. It's not about just having a magical number that you hit in terms of giving to a church or a religious charity, a mission, something like that, so that you could say, well, I'm checking the box and I'm doing exactly what, Pastor so-and-so or what this one Bible study or this one lesson, piece of scripture would make me believe I need to do in order to be holy enough. It's about having a heart that looks at the material things that you have, and instead of looking at them and saying, this is what I did, this is what I earned, this is what I have in order to provide for my family, instead, we look at the world around us and we say, I am not able to provide anything. God has blessed me with the ability to be able to provide for my family, with the ability to have a roof over my head and to have food to be able to eat. And because God has been so good to me, and because I understand the joy of knowing and having an understanding of who Jesus Christ is in my life, I cannot wait to share that experience with other individuals, whether it's me handing something to another individual in need, whether it's me combining things with my church family to do big ministry things, or whether it's me giving to some sort of organization that is doing things that are near and dear to my heart. We need to understand that anything on this earth, including the things that are present in our everyday life, are not the things that guide what we do. Instead, we are new creations. We have been recreated with a new purpose in the image of God. And if that is the case, He is the one who gives, He is the one who takes away. And because of that, so long as He has found it good to give me anything, I want to find every opportunity possible to give that back to others. That's our lesson that I have for today. I hope you're able to get something out of it. And until we can meet again, God bless.